Previously on Yu-Gi-Oh! History, we looked at the reign of the Dragon Rulers. For all the positives that problem-solving card text, well, solved, it created cards that were too powerful in relation to the contemporary card pool. So after not one but two ban lists, the message was clear. Dragons ruled no more. While the baby rulers were banned midway through, the climactic limiting of each adult dragon was the breaking point where duelists could finally breathe a sign of relief. What lies beyond the Dragon's Ravine and into the new dueling landscape? Well, we already covered the January list in the last video, so let's tackle the first major event of 2014, YCS Sydney on January 18th, the first ever YCS held in Oceania. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. One thing to keep in mind is that the two Dragon Ruler formats were a bit of an ice age. 2013's meta growth was stifled by overwhelming Ruler and Prophecy decks. Naturally, after the thawing of the environment beforehand, duelists went back to what topped previously, Mermail and Fire Fist. Which for that matter is funny how the upcoming meta would be known as Fire Water format when the same name could be said about it 1 year prior, but I digress. This makes it all the more surprising that at YCS Sydney, Anders Co won with a familiar deck, Teleport Karakuri. To be fair, the previous YCS at Turin saw Karakuri Yugioh win, so for those expecting Fire Fist, Mermail, or even a Ruler Remnant, was the shock victory that surprising? Karakuri has been a solid deck for years, and this variation was explosive with OTK potential. What is arguably more surprising is the contrast between Sydney and Turin, given the sheer number of top decks that duelists tried out in this new era. Fire Fist, Spellbook, Mermail, Harpies, Exector, and Thunder Hunter Zoo a shocking pick. Some of these decks we'll discuss later on, although Sydney would be a bit of an outlier event given how every other YCS of the spring 2014 period would be post the upcoming core set, making Sydney a weird one-off tournament. And real quick, also in January, there was an ARG Nashville tournament where Jeff Jones won $500 with Harpies in a grudge match, something I made a video on a couple years ago. Oh, right, that next set you ask? Released on January 24th, we would receive Legacy of the Valiant, or Laval. This could be considered the set that really tied the Zexal era together, a carpet set, if you will. Its main focus was on powerful new Xyz monsters such as Silent Honor Arc, which can detach to attach an opposing special summon monster, Evil Swarm Exciton Knight that, under the right circumstance, can wipe the board, giving Xyz their own Black Rose Dragon, and Ghost Trick Dullahan, which can detach to shrink a monster. In short terms, these were great toolbox cards. Laval also gave us new archetypes and archetypal support, like for Gravekeeper, Ghost Trick, Bujin, and the new Sylvans. This is in addition to other solid cards. Shared Ride, Obedience Schooled, Leo, the Keeper of the Sacred Tree, and of course, White Dustin, the proudest of them all. I may be understating the impact of the set, especially given Tachyon from last year. However, this new influx of Xyz monsters was the center point of the incoming meta. But before that, we have one more release to bring up. February 6th would see the next structure deck, Cyber Dragon Revolution. While not as revolutionary as it may proclaim, it did feature some solid new cards for the Cyber Dragon deck. Cyber Dragon Nova, Core, Dre, Cyber Repair Plant, and Cyber Network. Core was what the deck needed, for it could search for a back row Cyber card, count as Cyber Dragon, and can banish itself from the grave to special summon a Cyber Dragon monster from your deck. Sadly, at this current point in time, it wouldn't be enough to propel the deck to any topping spot. Regardless, the pieces are in place for the next round of YCS events. Going slightly before Revolution, this new era would start with YCS Atlanta on February 1st. As the first true YCS of the spring 2014 period, it was natural that Fire Fist would take first place, piloted by Christian Georges. This year's builds are not the same as before, with Rabbit Fist and Dino Fist dead, thanks to the limitation of Rescue Rabbit. That said, George's build wasn't the same with what was presented at Sydney. Over there, it was a variation called 3.5 axis Fire Fist that was named due to the heavier use of the level 3 Fire Fist compared to the 4 axis build, and also the addition of the limited Fire Fist Spirit, and thus 3 plus 1 is 3.5 because math. Likewise, there would be a +1 build that was 4 axis with Spirit for synchro plays. At Atlanta, the pure 4 axis variation simply performed better thanks to its upgraded rank 4 toolbox, making the change from Rabbit to Card D. Similar to Sydney, Atlanta would be filled with variety in the top cut. Karakuri Yugioh, Hieratic Ruler, Spellbook, Mermail, Infernity, Bujin, Dark World, and Evil Swarm. Would this hold up to the following event at YCS Berlin? Well, on February 20th, we find out with Alpe Ingen winning with the Water to the format's Fire, Mermail. Just like Fire Fist, while losing some power like Dragoons and Deep Sea Diva going to 1, the deck had no issue evolving. This build cut the Diva and focused around Abyss Gun to recycle resources to make rank 4s as opposed to the previous rank 7 iteration. With Laval's Silent Honor arc and other water rank 4s like Bahamut Shark and Abyss Dweller, the change made all the sense in the world. Once again, variety would fill the top cut with a classic deck making it, Chainbird. Yeah, it's been a while. In assembly line fashion, we head to Sao Paulo, Brazil, on March 8th, where Carlos Freitas won with a fun deck, Harpies. Turns out Jeff Jones was onto something. With all the recent support I brought up in the Dragon Ruler video, Harpies finally had enough firepower given the climate to pull out a win. It wouldn't be fair to say it was a tier 1 deck, and yet it was solid nonetheless. And that's because it was fragile in nature, and as such, it was able to be more proactive in its plays. Harpy Queen was a solid beater that could search Hunting Ground, which also gave the deck great back row removal. Channeler could summon Harpy monsters from the deck, and Hysteric Sign contains insane card advantage for the archetype. We'd also see Constellar in Top Cut, making Sao Paulo another YCS that continued to innovate in what decks could potentially win a major. What's even more surprising is at YCS Chicago on March 22nd, there would be another different deck winning. Here's Bujin by Tom Mock, a deck that enjoyed the unlimited status of Tenki. Bujins are a heavy control deck that needs to protect the castle, which in this case is Bujin Yamato, who can search for a Bujin monster during your end phase. There does exist a stun variation that uses Kaiser Coliseum or Vanity's Emptiness, however the control variation just had better results. Some new top cut strategies include Pure Gadget, Pure Yugioh, Fire King, and Ghost Trick Madolce, that's a neat one. This would also be the closest Dark World would get to victory, obtaining 2nd place, which is unfortunate given how hard duelists have been pushing the strategy. And that leads us to the April 2014 list. Yeah, I bet you weren't expecting a list in this video, but in all honesty, there's not much to talk about. Both morphing jars got banned for being degenerate. Limited, we saw Wolf Bark, which hit Fire Fist, Abyss Gun, which hit Mermail, Infernity Barrier, which was a fantastic card for the lower tier Infernity deck. Equally speaking, Rekindling was limited for being a bonkers card in Fire King. And the Semite and Unlimited cards were whatever. Typical Konami list, hit problematic and power cards, whilst hitting strong cards that could potentially gain strength with the newly made power gap. The jars were the most contentious hit of the bunch, however, they were, the jars, cards that were not developed for fair decks. So now technically we have a new format, really a one-off before the next Impact set. Here we have YCS Las Vegas on April 12th, where you could probably guess what happened. Yeah, another new first place deck in Hieratic Ruler by Denny Yu. While ruling no longer, the Dragon Ruler deck moved towards the pre-existing yet not as optimal Hieratic engine. But in a vacuum and not compared to 2013, the deck was still perfectly playable, even with Convocation going to 2. I mean, it was arguably the most explosive deck of the format, with access to Skill Drain to shut off most decks. Clearly, duelists were leaning back towards Ruler decks, seeing as we saw some people try out a Blue Eyes Ruler variation that is an evolution of Mythic Rulers. Yeah, Harpies and Blue Eyes in the same season. Anime fans rejoice. And while Chainbeat was a bit spicy here too, Spirit Ghost Trick showcases that Vegas continued the pattern set by the previous format. This was quite a fun period to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Literally every YCS had a different first place deck, with no single deck outrunning the competition. Reminiscent to Lightsworn format, Firewater format was a healing period when considering Dragon Ruler was a dark period, and beforehand with the controversial Shocklock windups. It wouldn't be far off to call it a rank 4 toolbox format, which by all intents and purposes was what the Zexal era was all about. In many ways, it was a return to classic Yu-Gi-Oh! With fair combo potential combined with methodical gameplay. There was a litany of contending decks, which made the format's pet name, Fire Water, rather misleading. At least it wasn't called Air, Earth, Fire, and Water format, a deck format used in some Pegasus Challenge tournaments that started in November 2009, following the September 09 list, in which each main deck had to include 4 monsters of the primary elements, but I digress. I mean, all of the attributes had meta representation in spring 2014. Wind Harpies, Earth Karakuri, Fire Fire Fist, Water Mermail, Dark World, and Light Heretics. Didn't like Constellar? Play Infernity. Didn't like Bujin? Play Evil Swarm. Didn't like Ghost Trick variations? Play Blue Eyes Ruler. So on and so forth. Many top duelists would theorize what the best deck was, and yet the results speak for themselves. A clear sign of a great format. It was a breath of fresh air given the last year of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh!, which for me making these videos was a total blast with chain. But will Yu-Gi-Oh! Continue to keep the health of the game strong, or will it divulge into another toxic biome?